Welcome to Something's Radio. We are back with Dr. Danny and Chris for the Bro and the Brain, and we have two great topics for you guys today. One is going to be about low back health and what are the best ways to attack growth with people who have a beat up low back, which is obviously me and probably most people in their 40s, um, who had any appreciable training in their 20s, 30s, and early 40s. And then we're going to finish up talking about your training. So that'll be fun and exciting for me because you said you're almost time to like maybe start doing some hard stuff again. So that excites me
Yeah.
and I'm ready for it. So I sent you a video on that Jordan Shallows made about essentially he was saying he believed the reason people lack back growth, and that's total back, so it's our erectors, lats, traps, rhomboids, everything in the middle, was because core instability. So weakness within your abs, your TVA, your obliques, your erectors. And I would love to hear Danny, you speak to that and maybe what's the reasoning behind that, and then is it the truth?
So first, I've known Jordan a long time, and I think really, really highly of him. He and I, like, we met in, God, I don't know, 2015. We were both at a meet and kind of started in the powerlifting circle together. We obviously have gone different directions with regards to our careers, and I think that when Jordan creates content, he does it with the intent of like not necessarily having a ton of nuance, like the big picture solution, right? And so that's where I think as a consumer, it's really important to recognize when someone is kind of the lighthouse, like shining their light, like, hey, here's a thing, versus someone being a tugboat of basically being like, here's how we get you there. So as a consumer, when you're consuming content, making sure that you recognize when someone's like that lighthouse, like sending the big message out versus the nuance of the tugboat. What Jordan, and I haven't watched the video, but what he's saying about the core being like weak, I think there's a lot of nuance too. So first off, I know he mentioned something about the rib cage, but he's basically saying everything that I spoke about with you whenever I was there in like March.
Yeah.
So when we think about like core weakness, I think what Jordan, and again, he's very, very smart. And I know that if you were going to dissect this down, he would probably say it's not weakness, it's a coordination, it's a timing issue, it's pressure management issue.
Right.
The best way that I could think about this would be if you have a muscle that's already really busy to stay, like busy stabilizing you, you can't then also ask it to lengthen. And if you can't lengthen, you can't contract. So for a lot of people, and where I think there's some nuance, especially if we're going to take like, the recipe that he gave on the video and apply it to you. And I said, I don't, that's for you, that's not it. And there's a reason for it. Um, so there are different reasons why people have a beat up low back. I think if we were to visualize this out, right, we have like the big picture idea of like, oh, like here's what you need like more core stability for a bigger back. Okay, well, yes, where does that like decision tree off to? And then like that kind of spreads open more, right? Um, I think if we're gonna think about the back issue having like different prongs to it, if I just do this, that makes sense, right?
Yes.
There can be a number of different issues. So that means there needs to be a number of different solutions. Most often, when I'm working with someone in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and their back is not growing and their low back is tight, it's not that their core is weak. It's that there are a billion reps of everyday life done where our pressure management system to keep us upright, rather than being able to manage pressure internally through like your intra-abdominal cavity, even like low key, um, has been shifted to our lower back. One big concept that I think people need to understand a little bit better is that muscles don't just have an on-off switch. We get this constant input on how active we have to keep the muscle via the nervous system and some of the intrafusal muscle fibers. They have different motor neurons that get sent, from the brain to and from the muscle. And they kind of calibrate the amount of tension we have in a muscle. Over time, over reps, over years, that whole system of how we just go about daily life kind of changes. And I think most people know that, right? Like most people in their, as they're approaching 40, 50, they're going to say, yeah, like my body just feels like it holds itself differently than it used to. You probably feel that, right?
Yes.
And now let's also add on, so that's one layer. Let's add on the layer of load, meaning that over time you've hammered on your erectors. Like you've wanted to have big erectors. hammered on your lower back, and you've moved a lot of weight, which means you've stabilized with that, right? So there's a lot of input that's been given to your body that this is basically where you're stable. Part of what that does over time is kind of take your whole rib cage and like shove it forward as those muscles get overactive. So all this stuff from a semantic standpoint, yes, it is weak, but it's not about the muscle so much as what that system is designed to do. And if we come back to the idea of like muscles not having an on-off switch, but having that kind of like the gamma motor neurons, like that dimmer switch, those need to be kind of repositioned. Um, there's a phrase of position before power,
Yes.
and that ultimately is like how we put muscles in a position to where they have the mechanical leverage to do what they need to do.
Yes.
So for someone like you, the reason I disagree with what was the recipe that
I wrote it. Let me see. I wrote it down in my notes. Let's pull it up. It was, oh, here you go. Barbell rows, deadlifts, one arm dumbbell rows, pronated lat pull downs, and then hammering on the abs and obliques.
run me through that one more time so I can write it down.
Okay. Barbell rows,
Barbell,
deadlifts, one arm dumbbell rows, pronated lat pull downs, like wide grip lat pull down, and then abs and oblique.
okay. If you're 25 and you are just starting to really get into things and like you want to make sure that you have a good biomechanical education for things, that stuff will work.
Agreed. Yeah.
For someone like you, when you sent that to me, I think I even asked, I was like, is this your solution or his? And I said, for someone like you, I completely disagree, right? Because again, let's look at the state of the system. You are not here, you're further down that line of development, which means that you're going to perform all those movements with your back already overactive.
Yes.
So for you, a deadlift, you're going to, if the goal is to basically engage your core, you're strongest in your back the minute you touch the barbell. If you're not super conscious of position, what's going to take over and finish the movement for you? Your back. Same thing that happens to me. But I do think it's worth kind of deconstructing why these movements have utility. So something like a barbell row.
Yep.
Um, yes, it can put some eccentric orientation onto the lats. It can put the rib cage in a shape where the scaps get pulled apart a little bit more just because gravity is more directly affecting that.
Right.
But that also demands that someone is proficient at finding a good hinge position first.
Yes. Yes.
Most people can't.
Right.
Um, Deadlift, we've talked about. You're going to get more erector dominance, and if you're someone whose gamma motor neurons and all of that are already all jacked up, your brain is going to go where you're safest moving. That's going to go to that.
Yep.
One arm dumbbell row. Do we want to do that Edmonds style, where you're kind of in that step forward, or do you want to go staggered stance? Because there are layers to that too. And depending on the amount of hip rotation someone has in the pelvis shape and the ability of the rib cage and pelvis to change shape, one of those is going to be better for you than the others. Like when you do a split stance,
Yep.
do you get the same length on your lat?
No.
Exactly. Um, so I think there's application, there's nuance. And the best thing that you and I probably would say to people is like to learn how to think for yourself about why might there be utility here?
Yeah.
Or why not?
I think as a whole, right? If I had a young kid, and I say young kid, it can be if your training experience is under 5 years, that might be a back workout I'd write someone. Not in that,
Totally.
maybe not in that order, but that would be 5 exercises that I'd be like, yeah, we're gonna bang those. Like,
Absolutely.
um,
Basics work for a reason.
right. And I mean, that's when I heard that, that's where my brain went. As I was like, okay, like, maybe I didn't watch the whole podcast. I think that was just like a 13-minute clip of it. So maybe that I missed the part in the interview where they spoke about like who that was for. But
Mhm.
the way it was posted, it was like, oh, if you have a low back issue and your back sucks, here's how you fix it. So to me,
Yeah.
that speaks for the spectrum. Where
Well,
listen, yeah,
I really like that they brought up the rib cage as a fulcrum because at the end
yeah,
of the day, like most people aren't thinking about the rib cage. And if I could go back and learn to train differently early on, that would be probably something I focus on a lot.
agreed. Yeah, same.
Um, what are your thoughts on like when we're looking at session order, like having abs at the beginning versus end of the session for the intent of like, let's say this is someone like you and you were like, okay, how can I make this session better for me?
Actually, can I say both? I like it at the beginning and the end. So I actually like to train like a upper like crunch style weighted movement at the beginning, and that's to get my abs like awareness like and activated. And then I like to finish with a lower ab like hanging leg raise to loosen my low back up. So
Hmm.
it's kind of a two-pronged approach there. I'm hitting abs at the ends or the extremes, first and last, but for very different reasons. So that's how I
Hmm.
would do that personally. Like I like doing either like a banded crunch where it's explosive or like that rope reverse crunch I used to have you do at the beginning of your back days
Yep.
to start because they're fucking hard too. And then finishing again with a hanging leg raise to loosen up my low back because I'm getting not only am I getting like just like a dead hang pull-up sensation, to lengthen my spine, but then I'm
Yeah.
also forcing my
Decompression.
abs to contract, lower abs to contract. So that's the antagonistic muscle of my erector is how I'll think about that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think you hit on a really, really important thing for people. Just with like, it doesn't have to be like a cool down movement, but
No.
putting something at the end of your session that's going to like offset any jankiness that pops up. Like,
Correct. Yeah.
probably one of those like super easy pieces of low hanging fruit that like people are like, how do you work your magic? And you're like, well, you just, I don't know if you get tight, like finish your session with something that's like the opposite and feel a little better. Like, it's really not that hard.
Because what do we do when we finish training? We go sit in a car and ride home, and then you come home, you make your
Yes.
meal, you sit down and eat, and then what am I going to do? I'm going to come to my computer and catch up on emails. So it's like
Yeah.
I don't need this. I need this. Meaning length
Yeah.
of those are vertebrae, by the way, if people weren't
Wait,
following
can you do that
the
again? Can you show us your vertebrae, Chris?
train. Yeah. So yeah,
I made a
that's
decision tree,
yeah,
so
yeah, right. Yes. So like that's how I look at that. What's really interesting, I do want to bring this up, is I've always felt like my lower back was a weakness in terms of my whole body, even as like an athlete, not as a bodybuilder. Like it, and the weird thing is like I could move weight, like squatting, deadlifting, front squatting, like that wasn't an issue. It wasn't like that muscle hasn't been developed, but it was a matter of like it never felt as powerful as the rest of my body, if that made sense. Like,
yeah, because it's already busy at rest.
and see, I'd never, what you just said there, you introduced me to that thought, and no one else had ever said it to me. And listen, I've been to so many fucking therapists at this point. Like, you said, Chris, of course your lower back feels weak. It's always working. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And you're like, because it's pulling your body back in upright. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah,
Well, I think that that's one of those issues that like people always want the fancy ways to think about things, and people want these fancy systems, and they want to talk about the compression expansion model and like, upper and lower rib cage and things like that. And don't get me wrong, again, like I love to nerd out over things like that, but let's come back to like what are some of the basic things we learned in our ex phys class? What's length tension?
right,
Right? Like, okay, so short muscle is going to be strong in that position.
right.
But if it's being utilized for function,
Yeah,
then you kind of lose the ability to take it out of that position and utilize it for something else, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
which I think is another good topic to talk about with abs is there's abs for function and abs for physique development,
yeah.
and they're very different.
Agreed.
Um, and so when we're talking about, and I'm sure this is something Jordan probably talked about too, like abs for development, you're going to do that differently than you're going to do for function. Um, and if I'm going to keep throwing gang signs and doing decision trees, there are different components to that. Like, yes, strength is one of the components that we want for function. Yes, stability, obviously that's what the core does.
Right,
There's strength, there's endurance. I mean, there's can it react? Sorry, it's early. My coffee's not hit me yet. Can it adapt? And a lot of that is just a proprioceptive awareness of what else is going on in the area. And I think we think very macroscopically in terms of it's this muscle,
right,
but we forget that there's a lot of other proprioceptive input coming up to the brain that then has to kind of control that descending output
right.
to coordinate everything. So there are these different properties that we need to train.
Yeah,
And when the brain is not, when it perceives any sort of threat, instead of taking all that information, what it's just going to do is say, okay, I'm going to keep this as safe as possible. I'm just going to lock that shit down.
right. Yes. Yeah.
So that's a lot of times like when someone jacks up their back while they're training, they're like get that like Tin Man walk after, and they're like, oh God. Have I like broken myself? No, a lot of times there's not really like a massive insult to the area, but whatever input has been given has been enough that the brain has just kind of gone, I don't know what to do with this, so I'm just going to lock everything down and preserve it.
Yeah.
Most times the people like what happens? Like you're a little bit tight the rest of the day, you're a little bit tight for a couple of days, but like, do you have any major injury? No, but you feel like you do, and you're scared.
Yes. Yeah. I think a lot of times people don't understand what that feeling of muscle spasm is. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like the amount of times my erector has went into like muscle spasm, then I'll go, I immediately know like that's when I need to go see my chiropractor. Like no matter what, I like send her an emergency message and she'll be like, "You're lucky you have erectors that are developed."
yeah, yeah. No kidding.
Um, and I mean, she's told me countless times, like if you didn't have that muscle developed, she's like, Chris, you would have been in full herniation. And like I think a lot of times like it's like a safety net, so to speak, that I think most don't understand or comprehend. And then they blow it off like, oh fuck it, just put like listen, I've been there, strap a belt on, load up the bar, I don't give a fuck. Like
Yeah.
that is not the right answer.
Oh, for sure. And I think that there are layers to that, and there's a next step to that, right? Is like, yes, obviously we want them strong, but then the next kind of layer of development, just like you'd want to develop an athlete, is can you train the muscle to shut off and go the other direction, and then find a middle ground? And for you, that's the challenging part. But that is also part of why back training for you, I think, can be a little bit more focused on like less on stiffness, more about like allowing fascia lines to develop and things like that.
Yes, and that I think that took me years to come to terms with my brain and like get into is, I speak about nutrition the way I have to train my back, right? Is like
Mm,
there's an art to it. It isn't textbook. It isn't like do this to that and this many negatives and like seconds and like, it's not that. It is allowing that tissue to open all the way up and stretch and then get it fully shortened and cramp, right?
yeah.
And you have to be able to move in multiple planes of motion. And that might be talking above some people's head. I get it. Like I'm trying to choose words here that people can understand, and I'm not dumbing down things to an
Well,
extent. Like,
I would say don't overthink because I think again, like let's get people thinking.
okay, yeah. Then I think so. If I'm thinking about a dumbbell row, right? So many people want to just fly into the full stretch or short of it and then jerk it back. And I think sometimes when you watch me dumbbell row, someone might think, oh man, he's just like moving very rhythmically. I'm like, no, no, no. I'm having to get full length and stretch. And then I need to pull aggressively towards my hip, right? In order to do that, I have to brace on the leg that is closest to the dumbbell rowing, which is why I designed that step forward row, right? Like I have to create length where the hip is tall. And then I'm pushing what I'm thinking about is all that lat muscle towards the floor of my foot. And then if I'm not stable on that, if I'm rolling with my left arm on my left leg, using my right leg just as a simple kickstand so I don't fall over, like that's what I have to think about. Gain length, find short. Gain length, find short. And
Mhm.
it is literally rhythmic for a reason. Because if you're janky with it or tight, or I'm trying to think what the right word is, like really rigid, you can't allow that muscle to open up and fill length. Yeah.
There's Bill Hartman is a PT who is absolutely brilliant, and a lot of it. He's kind of the originator of like the compression expansion model, and he's really, I think, moved a lot of people forward. His ideas are difficult to understand. I think some people kind of write him off as like, oh, he's just another guru. He's just a little crazy, but he has a lot of physics principles that make a lot of sense. He's not talking in the world of hypertrophy, but there's a lot of carryover, right? One of the concepts that he talks about is the idea of like what he calls like dead guy anatomy, which
Yeah.
is that if you took like a steak and you dehydrated it and it was like beef jerky, that's I think how people visualize our muscles when they're thinking like, this is my lat, this is my lat. But if you actually take a steak and you want to like move that sucker around, and I'm not just talking like, like a straight cut, I'm talking like you get a whole round steak, right? Because that's probably more similar to most of our muscles. There's a lot of movement in that. And if you wanted to find a way to lengthen all of those fibers and then shorten all of those fibers,
Yeah.
kind of having that visual, I think is helpful.
You know what's funny is that came very natural to me for like leg training and training chest, which were
Hmm.
things that I was really good at when I was young. And then it took me years to figure that out for shoulders. And then once I did, they grew and blew up, right?
Mhm. Hmm.
And for back, I was so hyper focused on it being my weakness that I actually thought the opposite, which was really dumb, right? I'm like, okay, maybe instead of being expansive and contractive, I need to be like hyper focused and like I need to stop allowing my delts, my traps, my arms pull. So I need to be like make sure that just that lat pulls. And I'm like, then I got to like obsessing my videos and I'm like, that's too rigid. Like it's too focused. Like get back into training how you train the rest of your body to get growth.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I know that may be weird for some people to hear, where it's like, oh, Chris, like actually let off of his form a little bit. I'm like, no, I just learned how to train my back the right way. Because if you look at like someone like, I always think Kai Green was a master of back training. Watch him do any row, and you can watch it. You can literally watch his body just allow things to happen. I know that sounds simple, but you can like if he's training in a tank top, not in a hoodie, like watch him
Yeah.
do like a CD cable row and just
Hmm.
appreciate the beauty of it. And I promise,
Yeah.
no matter what angle you look at it, if you view it from the back, watch how the body responds to length and shorten. And then when you see it from the side, you can see the expansion and contraction. If you watch it from the front, it's like that looks perfect.
I think what one thing that I've really been trying to figure out how to articulate, because I see this all the time again, like the guys that work with me are the ones who generally come from like a powerlifting background. A lot of times they found me on Elite and they've gone to bodybuilding, and they're like, I can't grow anything. I hurt everywhere. Back hurts, hip hurts, knee hurts, everything. What do I do? And I'm like, okay, we got to rewire the system. It's not about movement selection, right?
Yeah.
And something I've really been trying to figure out how to articulate is why is it that someone like I look at Martin too, right? We're like Martin, granted, he's like, he's such an outlier in terms of just he's truly a Martian.
Yeah.
And he's also been very, very strong. But I think about well, part why do some people have just those really pretty lines of pull where they can for whatever reason find better length and better contraction, just looks smoother,
Yep.
kind of like what you're talking about with Kai,
Yes.
versus someone like again, I'll just use my husband Dave as like the polar opposite. He looks pretty like he's really trying to find length, but just qualitatively, you can see that like he finds it all through like one section of the muscle rather than the whole thing.
All right. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. It,
And I,
you know how I describe that or I think about the analogy? It's someone going down a gravel road versus the brandly new paved road is what it looks like to me.
or like one of those car commercials through like where they're like driving through Europe and it's nice and like windy. That is a great depiction. I love that.
Yeah. Because
So we
listen, they're still getting to the same destination,
right.
start and finish, but it looks very different along the way.
Yeah, well, if you take someone that's like off-roading versus like, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a great rate. I love that. I'm probably gonna use that going forward.
Please do. Yeah.
Um,
That's how I look at things when I watch people train and like, I think a lot of times people are like, oh, that's just a strong body part for them that grows for them, they connect to it, whatever. But I've always liked to look at that where most people will say, don't look at those individuals for growth because it just came easy. And I'm like, well, maybe growth came easy because they are so in tune with that movement selection and exercise grouping for them, right? Like, I think people say like, oh, you can't watch Ronnie train back, like anything would have worked for him. And I don't think I necessarily believe that. I think there are things we can learn from every, like, or say Phil Heath training arms. Like, yes, they are probably genetically gifted, but when we watch those people train those body parts, what can we learn and take away from it? Is how I look at
for
it. Yeah.
sure. Well, kind of where I was thinking about that was like training history really matters, right?
Yeah.
Martian, wow. Martin was he was a wrestler. He was a rotational athlete. He was I believe, shot putter or disc shot putter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he was already good at rotating versus Dave, like, didn't play sports. He powerlifted in high school. That was like his thing.
Right.
And so one of those demands rigidity and trains you into rigidity early on, which is gonna, again, like, let's talk about all that myofascial decision tree and like the gamma motor neuron system, all of that system and now all the deep fascial lines, all that connective tissue is now very dense, rigid, doesn't move. So he's got that gravel road look. Watching him move is that off-road. Versus someone like Martin, who was he training all planes of motion? No. Was he still very strong? Yes. But Did he acquire that strength? Probably through means that were not exclusive and were not like he wasn't only exposed to a rigid system. He also did a lot of other things.
Right.
So I think that's where like athletic development early on plays a role,
Mhm.
and then structural bias too plays a role. So like
Right.
I don't know if we've talked about this, but if we're gonna, tie it back to a lot of the core stuff we were talking about early on, one of the reasons I get so like hot and bothered about the rib cage is that if we think about the strength of a system, and you're going to imagine the diaphragm as basically like your stabilizer. People with a wider infrasternal angle, or like again, if you want to learn more about the ISA, anyone that's listening wants to learn more about the ISA model, I highly recommend go listen to Bill, go listen to Zach Couples, Dr. Sean Astorga, great resources. But a wider ISA model is basically going to have a wider, larger diaphragm,
Mhm.
which probably means they're going to have a different system for managing pressure than someone like myself, who's more narrow and more closed off, and that muscle's lost its mechanical advantage. So structure really does matter when you're watching someone like Phil, who's a wide ISA. Not only on top of that, his thoracic diaphragm and pelvic diaphragm are roughly like they're a little bit more proportional
Right.
versus someone who's wide up top and narrow at the bottom. These are the guys who have a lot of like hip and glute issues, like from the back, they're constantly clenching their glutes, and you're like, buddy, let go of your butt cheeks.
Right. Yeah.
And so the differential between of size between the thoracic and pelvic floor, basically, is a huge determinant in how well we manage pressure, which is going to tell us again, like that's going to influence that whole like intrafusal muscle fiber network, which is going to change our stability, which is going to change how well we can let go of a muscle if we're not using it at rest like all the time. Does that make sense?
It does. You know what's really interesting is I'm glad you brought that piece in here because my massage guy finally moved back ta to town, and
Nice.
of course, like I'm going to book a session with him immediately. So, he's like, his first question is always me, all right, what's going on with your body? And we talked. I was like, listen, man, I was like, my back is just tight. I was like, my back and shoulders just feel tight. I was like, it needs just, please God, just get in there and dig it out, right?
Yeah.
So after he worked through my traps, my erectors, lats, and delts, he flipped me on my side, pinned my arm over my head like this, and then he put his leg on my hip.
Yes.
And he began to take his knuckles and drag my entirety of my ribs from my armpit to my hip.
Yep. So that is a concept called lateral compression,
Yes.
where from top, if we were going to look at your rib cage from the inside, from bottom to top here. So basically, when you are so active in the back, what happens is you just get smooshed front to back like this.
Yes.
That
Yep.
is when you cannot create pressure. So the only place you can stabilize from is your low back,
Right.
which makes it really, really hard to grow the muscle or not have your low back feel like trash all the time. One of the ways we can kind of reshape that is by pushing pressure on the sides to allow this to happen.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense for you. That concept is something that if I'm working with someone who has back pain, trying to explain that and do it in a way that's like meaningful is probably one of the biggest hacks I can give people. Decompression is great. Like, yeah, we want spinal decompression, but ultimately, like, you gotta be able to get the ribs and pelvis moving
And
better.
you know what's wild about that? I mean, it was excruciating.
God, I bet. I
And
bet.
I mean, he just put like two knuckles to start with, I would say, like maybe a 5 out of 10 pressure. And everything in my body wanted to go fetal position, right? Like
Hmm.
you just want to do, or sorry, more like this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Protect it.
And he's such a giant man. Like, of course, like he's gonna pin me to that table and keep me elongated, right? So I can't run from that pain. And then next thing you know, like then he starts to apply more pressure, more pressure, more pressure. And then you just, for me, I just start to get like this. I was at like probably a 9.5 out of 10 pain. And then it goes to 8 and then 7 and then 6. And then I'm breathing normal and he's having a conversation with me and he's just continuing to hammer those ribs, right? And I'm always amazed by that because this is always my thought. How poor has my training been because of that? Just that alone. Um, because like you said, like how can I expect my lats to grow if I can't expand properly? And the answer
Hmm.
is I'm getting what 50, maybe 40% activation. Like so no,
And
no,
it's a tough thing for a lot of people is like if we don't have something like I don't have anyone out here that I would I've got one gal that I would trust to work on me,
Mhm.
but like it's if you don't have someone like your guy, how do you get that yourself? And I think there's a lot of confusion around things like, when is foam rolling helpful? When is it not helpful? And people very much think about it as helpful or not helpful either or, but it's just like any other intervention. We want to look at dosage, we want to look at timing, we want to look at intensity, we want to look at direction. So there are all these other parameters that rather than just saying it works or it doesn't, we got to look at just like a medication, like
Right.
under what circumstances is it applied? And I'll be honest, like formerly something that I really like hated on for a long time because it was so the rage, and the contrarian in me was like, whatever, it's not actually breaking up fascia, blah 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 blah.
Right.
And is the breaking of fascia? No.
Yeah.
But what is it doing? And now, 15 years later, and with a lot more education under my belt, and I think that there's a time and a place for it. And we could probably spend an episode even just talking about like how do you do your own soft tissue work if you don't have someone? What are the basic principles? How do you get more out of it? How do you make sure you're not wasting your time? How is it something that can make your training better? Um, things like that.
Yeah. You know what's really interesting? This is something I always wonder when trying to apply those principles to myself is like, am I doing it hard and long enough? Right? Where he's gonna stay on that until I fully release, right? Like, and I mean, it's agony. Like, and I try anyone that comes to me like, oh, Chris, I had a deep tissue massage, it wasn't that bad. I'm like, your therapist sucks. Like, you just wasted money. Like, you're telling me it didn't hurt a little bit. Like anyone who has ever came into town and used my guy, they're always like, that was fucking horrible. And I'm like, yeah, but how much better do you feel now, right? Like,
Mhm.
and he's not one of the. I think they're also no. Please, everyone, listen to me. I think there are tissue therapists out there who intentionally try to hurt people, and that's their business card. And I do not think that is acceptable either. Um, so there is a spectrum there. Like it needs to be aggressive, but not to the point where you're damaging tissue. You and like that's a whole other podcast. But to kind of
Yeah.
get back on my thought process that I was going into, I always wonder like, am I doing enough? Am I doing it hard enough? Or on the flip side, am I doing too much and I'm actually damaging myself, right? Like, which is why I prefer someone else to conduct that activity on me because I trust the two guys that I have work on me. Do you know what I mean? Like, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to answer your question of if you don't have someone you trust, or maybe you don't have the funds, because listen, at one point I didn't have the money it takes to pay for that kind of massage from someone who is good. Um, that to me has always been, I've always thought about it this way, like a foam roller, stretching, mobility work, lacrosse ball, like little small training soccer ball. I use that all the time on my psoas and things. A so right. Some is better than nothing. That's kind of how I look at it. And then you just kind of progress up intensity. Like how I try to teach my guys to do it is like a day one beginner, I'd never have them do 30 sets of quads.
Yeah,
We'd
yeah.
probably start with five and see how it feels. And then if that works well and they're recovering, maybe we go to seven. Like, so with tissue work, I kind of feel the same way. Like, let's like break that barrier of doing it yourself and see what happens and how you feel, how you recover. And then if it's not enough, we can simply add more.
Hmm.
It's kind of same thing as the way I view like drugs and gear with my guys, right? I'm never going to start someone on a gram of test. Like,
Yeah.
let's say you operate with 400.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I very much agree with that. I mean, I think like any intervention, it's like what's the minimum effective dose?
Correct. Yes.
And trying to find that line. And knowing when is like, okay, like we know this is the minimum effective. Like, how much better do we get it if we give you a little more? Is it a lot or a little? Like, is it juice worth the squeeze kind of thing? And recognizing too that that line is going to change over time.
Yes. Yeah. Like, I'll give you a good example. Like a couple of weeks ago, like my shoulder was giving me a little bit of issues. So I just laid down on the floor to start my chest shoulder and I got a barbell. And I put it right here and I just rolled it up all the way into my delt and then rolled it all the way down. And then I was doing some like internal, external rotation while I was letting it just sit on a trigger point. And a guy came over, he's like, how effective is that? I'm like, I would not start here.
Yeah.
Um, because that is a pretty evasive technique. Which is why I didn't film it and put it on the internet, by the way. But yeah, again, that's not where I would start if you're having shoulder issues, but that is something I know I can call on if I had to.
Well, I think that, that's right in alignment with a lot of other things that we see in the media, right? Is that the extremes are generally what we're going to see the most of. Like if I get on YouTube and I'm looking for an exercise demo and I'm like, I know what I want, I just don't have it filmed because I don't for whatever
Yeah.
reason. I go to YouTube and I search for mobility. The things that pop up are almost always the most extreme, meaning they're like super low key, just roll around and breathe, or it's like we're going to crank on the tissue and it's going to be very aggressive and I tell people all the time, on a scale of 0 to 100, if this guy's going at, a 90, I want you to start at a 35, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that just even those little teaching points and qualifiers, again, like you and I are very big on teaching people how to think for themselves so they can have their own solutions. Um, and I think that's where a lot of value comes in, like, try it. Knowing that you're probably going to get better with less than more.
Yeah. You're right.
You can
Right.
always ramp up.
Correct. Yep.
Very common principle in rehab too is that like ACL rehab, for example,
Mm.
you can't really do a lot to like speed up what is a biological process. Like there are certain timelines, right? Like, yeah, okay, you've got different peptides and whatnot. You can speed up some of the cellular healing and things like that. So you see people come in and push too hard too soon and they regret it, right? But I've never had anyone regret doing what like is the most effective thing for them, and they usually come back stronger, faster. The return to play is faster, provided they're with a good therapist, things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Same thing with like tendon issues. Like
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people come to me and regret being like, I was too aggressive because now I've got a 2-year chronic tendinopathy
Right.
versus like, okay, early on, and this is like in its acute stages,
Mhm.
laying off for 6 weeks.
Right.
I've never had anyone regret that.
No.
I've often had people regret doing too much too soon.
It's that toothpaste analogy, right? Like you can't put it back in the tube. Once you squeeze it out, bro, you got to fucking deal with
Why
it.
am I a 14-year-old boy and I cannot hear that without saying that's what she said?
Right. Yeah. 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 Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's
No,
there. I had to take it.
another analogy that there is no putting that out of the system. No. But yes. What you just said there about the extremes get views is probably why you and I don't have a million followers on Instagram, right? Is because what we believe in and what works isn't dramatic and sexy, right? Like it's not.
Mhm.
If I made a video about the why using 2 grams of tren a week would help me go from a heavyweight to a super heavyweight, that would get a lot of views,
Oh, totally.
right?
Totally.
Do I recommend that? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I actually think and have found and am finding the lowest amount of tren effective is usually the best. Why? Because your body is less toxic. I'm having a ton of progress with guys right now using 25 MIGs every other day. So
So like 75 to 100 megs a week kind of thing.
do the fucking
Yeah.
math on that. Like where normal bodybuilding is 50, 75, or 100 a day,
Yeah.
right? So just some food for thought there. Not that I want to turn this into a drug conversation, but
I think we could though,
yeah, yeah,
easily.
yeah, yes. But that's how I view, any of this stuff that we're speaking about with low back health is, again, you have to, in my mind, listen to your body as step one, right? When I stretch, do mobility work, get massage, my low back feels the absolute best. If I'm lazy with all those three things, that's when I feel the most tight. Okay, logically, why is that? Like, it's pretty clear.
Yeah.
Motion and movement creates peace and harmony, right? Like, which is why I think that goes with your philosophy of I'm just from speaking with you, I know that you believe movement is a key for rehabbing injury. Same premise. If I want a muscle and joint to be healthy, I have to create movement, blood flow, and some sort of demand on that tissue to function properly, right?
Absolutely.
Um, so like that's when I'm thinking about low back. Like those are like kind of the three like what I would consider pillars of starting. Then next, exercise selection goes next. Okay, cool. What feels great, what feels terrible, and what feels in the middle. Okay, then you need to dissect why each one of those work that way for you, and then be solution based when creating a training program. And again, we're at the point of the video. Like I don't have time to talk through each one of those talking points,
Right.
but logically, okay, a deadlift feels worse than a rack pull. Why? And I need you to think about that for you individually, not you, Danny, but the
Right.
listeners. Why does a rack pull feel better than a deadlift? Okay. What does a deficit deadlift feel like in comparison to those other two? And why? And we begin to find answers or solutions to problems, right? Like that's how I look at training. And I know you do too, which is why you and I have great conversations about training. So yeah.
Yeah. I think, like the one other layer that I would add on to that would
Mhm.
be just like, what's the system's current state?
Yeah,
My
yes.
big, like,
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
the big thing that I look at with like my branding, for lack of a better word, on my website right now is that like, listen, like if you're 35, 40 or older and you're trying to do what you did when you were 25 and kind of got better in spite of yourself, like the system's different. You can't have the same solution.
Correct. Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and so we can kind of segue this into my training right now because I think that like I'm in a place where again, like just for posterity's sake and for, all the talk about fatigue management and stuff that you and I have kind of been like, oh my God, like people just work hard, you're gonna be fine. I do think there's some nuance to be had here.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and I'll even, I'll bring up Nick Walker. If you followed his training over the last few, what, 6 months now,
Yep.
none of it's been his traditional training style.
Nope.
It's been very low key, very zen, very like he's using like, 4 plates on the leg press kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, obviously he looked phenomenal in New York. I
Yeah.
thought he was his freshest, his fullest. His body looked like not just beat up.
Right.
He didn't lose his strengths.
Nope.
He looked bigger. Um, and so I think that's a really interesting topic because I think that that kind of training is probably where I need to go right now.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
another person I'm thinking of right now is Liv Roth, who Hunter Labrada's wife.
Yep.
I mean, when she was competing, talk about like hardcore training, like she dug. Um, but in the last, I'd say probably 2 years, if you watched her train, you'd be like, it doesn't look that hard, but she's been very methodical about where she's actually like, putting the tension and things like that.
Yes.
So I think if we're going to kind of bring this back to like what I was talking about with like all, the gamma motor neurons and intrafusal muscle fibers and things like that, there is a point at which when that system is so overloaded that nothing knows how to let go anymore, there's probably a much different approach that needs to be had. Now, there are some other components with that. Again, I'm going to throw out my little gang side. For me, a lot of it comes down to like, pressure management and being able to actually expand my rib cage. Can you hear my dog snoring?
No. I saw his foot like go like this a minute ago. Like he
Uh,
raised his hand in the background.
he's part chow, so he's got all the like this going on, and he's got fat boy snoring going on right now. Um,
What's really interesting, I had a conversation with a guy yesterday on Instagram who actually trains at Elite around the same time that I normally do.
oh, crazy, yeah.
And it made me question like what I put out on the internet because he was asking me a lot of questions and he was honest with me. He's like, Chris, I can't afford your coaching. Like, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you some of these questions that I'm just curious about. And he was asking me on how to apply cardio to lose body fat. And he listen, this is a guy, he comments and watches everything that I do. He watches every YouTube release. And I said, let me ask you a question. Based on everything you've seen me post, how many sessions of cardio and how much cardio do you think you should do right now? And he responded right back. He's like, got it. I'm going to do cardio every day. I'm like, fuck, no. And I was like, no. I was like, and he had already answered this in his original DM was like, he's only doing like maybe two, maybe three cardio sessions, very inconsistent per week. And I said, okay, I'm going to give you the answer, but I wanted you to think. I was like, if you're only inconsistently doing two or three, like, how about we just nail three or four for 20 minutes and just do it? And he's like, okay. And I'm like, we
Yeah.
we don't want to go to all the other extreme. Like, let's just be consistent and do, three or four
Mhm.
sessions at 20 minutes, where he said he was inconsistent with two or three 30-minute sessions. So I was like, okay, let's just develop a
Of a
habit.
pattern.
Right. And then we can build our taper up if we need it. But let's
Right.
elicit the most fat burning out of the least amount of effort and just be consistent with it. So now we have a tracking metric of like, okay, 80 minutes of cardio total for the week is eliciting this reduction in body fat. Okay, cool. Now what? Now we can either add a session or increase the duration by 5 minutes, and then we're going to get more fat loss, right? Or
Yeah.
pair that with a reduction in calories, whatever. Um, so yeah, it made me like really question like Oh, that sometimes I think when I put things out, I'm so opposite spectrum of these RIR guys that are, I'm trying to push back against that people are missing like the overarching principle of what I thoroughly believe in, which is what are you doing now? What are your goals? And then we need to work towards them with like consistent steps, right? So
Mhm,
if you want to
mhm.
gain muscle and you're eating 2,500 calories, the answer isn't eat 6,000 calories. The answer is equal eat 3,000 and see how long we can grow off of that.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, for example, and with the rehab stuff and with the training things, it's very similar. Like if I'm thinking about your training right now, like I know you would probably be ecstatic if I was like, hey, go do that program I sent you over to demo. But you and I both know like that's not going to be the most effective thing because you don't need all of that, right? That's the deep
yeah,
shit. That's what I would love to see you do going into a prep if you even need that much. Like,
right. Well, I think that's, that's a hard thing. And I'll be really honest again, like I had like 3 to 4 weeks, actually longer than that. I had a little run where I was deadlifting
oh yeah,
and I was starting to feel pretty good. And I was like, cool, like maybe I'm gonna get that, I'm gonna get it back again.
yeah,
Um, and it started off as just 135 every week because I was like, I just want to get to the thing I love again. And right now I hate deadlifting. I'll feel most myself if I just promise I'm gonna do a set of deadlifts every week, 135. I don't care what it is, just do it.
yeah.
Work back up, hit a beltless set at 405, which is great. Um, and over the next 3 weeks, kind of started to feel some fatigue kick in.
Mm,
And then I hit such a wall that it's taken me another 3 to 4 weeks to dig out of. And I'm not talking like I'm a little sleepy. I'm talking like my bones ache. I'm falling asleep driving to the gym every day. Like, and it's and it's hard. It's really hard because I think if you've trained for a long time, you get so used to thinking like I got to get it back. I got to get it back. Got to get it back. And you start almost constantly looking in your rearview mirror rather than figuring out how to look forward. And I realized this morning as I was eating my oats, I was like, I've literally been telling myself I got to get it back for the last year and a half now. And just with all of the stuff that we talked about with fatigue management over the last, however many weeks now, and as much as that's a thing, and I think it's overstated, but that's a really hard line to walk. It's really, really freaking hard when you're not afraid of the work and you're more afraid of not doing the work.
yeah. I mean, I mean, I can't tell you how many times you told me that is you're like, I'm just scared you're not giving me enough. And I'm like, I'm actually scared I'm giving you too much. So it's like your mind was here and mine was like, oh, well, you know, for example, like if I was able to train you every day for the Olympia, I would assume that some days we may have done three things and then I'm like, we're good. Trust me. Where you would have been probably like fighting me, like I'd have had to probably watch you get in the car and go home with and follow you home to make sure
And
you
make sure I didn't like turn around and come
turn around and
back.
go finish. Yeah. Because, you know, listen, we are raised in the mindset of we have to exhaust everything. And for the most part, I would agree with that in a healthy body, but we have to realize like we aren't always in that healthy body that we may have formed the foundation of our training principles, right? And
Yeah,
I mean, I think people have heard me speak about that with the with squatting and deadlifting and T-bar rows and all that crazy shit like that I used to do and I identified with.
yeah.
Like diminishing return, homie.
It's and for me, like, there's another element of like I built not only like, my training, but like my brand is a
Yeah.
business was built on doing the hard shit. Like I don't
Yep.
coach women. I coach men, which like almost exclusively. I have like two women in my roster, which means that I gotta be able to hang at some level, right? Um, and I think that like there's this weird it's so hard to let go of the things that got us where we are.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
That's what I was gonna say, but
I think
I
it's
mean,
like,
I told you on the call before we got on today that like, part of why I've not reached out to you formally is that like I'm scared as a coach, I'm scared to let you down. I'm scared to not be able to give you what I think you deserve as a coach. And I think that's something that, of course, like logically, do I know that's not going to be the case? Yeah, of course. But I do think that's something that a lot of people wrestle with. And so for both of us, like whatever our messages we put out there, because generally we want to encourage people to train hard. Um, I think it's just important to note that like, yeah, again, as a consumer, most coaches are going to put out a message and be clear on that, but have a lot of levels in between, zero and that.
I think that's where I know for a fact because I've gotten this feedback of I'll have guys that'll follow me for 1, 2, 3 years before they ever buy coaching from me. And they all say this like, it's really wild to think that I've consumed this much of your knowledge, but what you're actually giving me in coaching is customized. And I'm like, yeah, like I have things that I believe in, right? Like intra workout nutrition being one of them. Every person I work with is going to have some sort of intra workout and some capacity. But at the end of the day, like when you do my coaching, I give you what I feel is best for you in that moment of time. And that to me is like what separates what you and I do from everyone else, where I think everyone else has a system and like, oh, you have a fucked up knee, do this. You have a shitty set of arms, do this workout. Where I'm like, maybe. Maybe it might work, maybe it won't. And I think like that's where we end this is like when whenever you decide to fully release your training back to me and we get into it, like we're gonna have a call and we're gonna talk about everything. Like it's gonna be I'm gonna be asking you probably 50 to 100 questions, formulating a plan, you doing it, and then we come back to that plan and say,
Yeah,
too much here, too little here, I'm missing something here, this can be taken away. And it's the evolution of that training plan built based upon your body's feedback. And no matter if that's lower back health, nutrition, training, cardio, like that's how good coaches, in my opinion, operate.
completely agree.
And sadly, as you know through your business model, that's not a fast process. You can't work with 160 people a day with this model. You can't. There's not enough minutes in a day. And again, that's probably why I don't coach 378 bikini girls, um, where there are other guys and girls who get really rich off of cookie cutter plans and they sell them for a quarter of my rate and they work with thousands of people. And you get your new diet plan on Tuesday. And it's an auto text or an email. It's not, oh, all right, do you see meal two? I pulled rice out because you told me your rice didn't feel well. I replaced it with oats to give you more sustained energy because it slowed down because of the fiber. I added almond butter to it. That is a custom meal plan. Oh yeah, because you went hypo during your training session that was 3 fucking hours long because you did a 3,000 sets for glutes. Yeah, that's not custom training, homie. Everyone got that shit. Uh, yeah, I'm gonna end on that rant there. How's that sound?
I'm with you. I mean, my roster's capped at 30 for a reason.
30, 30.
Three
Not
zero. And that's max.
right, right, right. Because again, you understand that the people you work with need fine tooth comb in addition to sledgehammer. And the only way you accomplish both of those goals is by taking time, effort, and energy on assessing the entire picture. And
Headspace. Hmm.
yeah, it's just the truth. So until next time, Chris, Danny, choose your coach wisely because your money will get wasted really quickly.